Hey everybody, welcome back to the Jubilee, Freedom, and Shalom podcast. If you're on YouTube watching, you're seeing Nate do funny things with his hands. If you're listening, Nate is doing funny things with his hands.
I didn't do anything.
Know. You'll never know unless you watch us on YouTube.
Yep.
We're trying to put some of these up on YouTube just for something more interesting. If you would rather look at our faces while we're talking rather than just
it feels more human.
Our voices. Yeah. It feels like you're in the conversation. Or I guess on YouTube, one thing I didn't really think about is just comment section.
So, oh man!
In terms of,
that's true.
Yeah, even if someone just absolutely trashes us, it's
at least it can be
interacting.
That's right. At least
it's out
on
there.
Our channel, and
we know how you feel now.
We're all being honest with each other.
Yeah, I wish you could do podcast commenting. Why is that?
I know. I actually thought about that the other day. I was like, "There's got to be a way to leave a comment on a podcast." But
raise your hand if you're an Apple Podcast user. That's me. You know how you can scroll up and you can see like your queue of podcasts to come, or you can press show. It shows you the show notes. Should be a comment version. Because you can leave reviews.
Yeah, and you can like change your review, but it's got to be like my final word.
And it's for the whole thing. It can't be about an episode.
Mm-mm. Yep, that is true. You can update them. You can grow them longer, but you can't do individual.
That's so interesting. Oh, well.
But we can on YouTube.
Yeah, there you go. No, problem solved. Yeah, you just have to say no to 27 ads of YouTube asking you to pay for it. Like, no, right. The point, this is YouTube. The point of YouTube is that it's free.
It's free.
You can't call it YouTube anymore if it's not free. Anyways, welcome back to the podcast. This week we're talking more about buildings, about specifically for us as ministers, church buildings. But this could and should play into.
So sorry.
Was that an alarm?
So we pray every day at 3:00 with my students on Instagram Live. So nice. Sorry about that.
It's all good. So this should apply to our houses. So churches, houses, but it also, after our conversation the other day, I was visiting my parents in Washington, D.C., and just even looking around the buildings that, there's a bunch of headquarters there. So like, for example, this is a really funny thing I caught myself saying, but we saw Hilton's headquarters and my dad was like, oh yeah, that's the headquarters for Hilton. And it was a really, really plain, boring building. Would you think like, this is Hilton? They like do it up. And what I said was, it seems like the priority is their hotel's looking good. And then I thought, it was like, oh, it was like, oh, I guess their building says something about what they care about. Whereas like Capital One, their building was like, it's a crazy cool design, lots of glass, and it's supposed to look like sleek and modern and cool. Right. And
it is interesting to see like how banks do their building. Because you don't want to go to a bank that is in like a janky strip mall or like some, what I mean? Like,
got a standalone.
You never see a bank in a strip, do you? It's always a standalone.
I don't think so. I can't think of it. It depends if you count like a credit union in the same category.
I don't think I've ever seen a credit union that's not.
We have one down the road.
Okay.
But it's,
But they're trying to exude confidence, right? It's like, we got nice landscaping, we have nice things. If you bank with us, you'll have nice things.
Yeah. Or it's just like also, the buildings make it look like this is a safe place for you to hold your money.
Right, exactly.
If I was trying to communicate that though, I would build like a moat around my bank.
If you were just in a strip mall, then people could just like drill through the
we've all seen heist movies. Come on.
It's like there's like a Dollar General next door and someone like
they just
out of the bank.
Yeah. Just over time, one of the workers at the Dollar General is just digging a hole slowly.
With the plastic cutlery that they sell at Dollar General.
Exactly. Oh man. But yeah, just even that moment, it made me think of our conversation. So all that to say, if you haven't heard the previous conversation, this is episode 14. Episode 13 is the conversation that preempts this one. And what we did in that conversation, Nate can give us a good recap, but I think it's important that you would go listen to that one first before this one, if you can.
Because it's the why and this is the how.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about what we, quick look over what we talked about last time.
Yeah. So we started with, a quote from a podcast, Paul Wheaton's podcast, episode 495, as they're reviewing the Permaculture Handbook. Mm-hmm. And it's basically a textbook about design. And yeah, it's a lot about growing plants and all this kind of stuff, but really the design concepts. I think anything that's like a first principle type statement can really be taken into a lot of other scenarios. So we were kind of taking that into building design and church design, because the quote was, anytime we design anything, it's a moral action. Whether we embrace that truth or not, we bake our morals into everything we design. So making an effort or not making an effort, that is a moral decision that you're making.
Right. And Paul Wheaton is not a believer.
Not that I know of. No.
He may have some, fear of and respect for some divine being, potentially.
So he's actually funny about that. He has one podcast out of obviously close to 500 now. He has one podcast you have to pay like $200 for, where he talks about his political and religious beliefs. And he's like, do not buy it. Don't do it. It's irrelevant. But people ask me all the time, like, please tell us like what's your stuff. And he's just like, no, it's so irrelevant. And he's just like, fine. I will record my politics and religion podcast. I'll tell you everything I believe, but I'm not giving it away for free because I'm going to punish you people that pester me all the time. You have to pay like $200 to listen to that one podcast, which is funny because like it's so indicative of like how we work. Look at what he does on a day in and day out basis. He bought land out in Montana. They're building like a small community of natural built houses and setting up a farm and setting up all this permaculture design stuff. Workshops and rocket mass heaters, which are like a really efficient way to heat your house with wood, which I'm going to talk about at some point on this podcast. But all this stuff, he's innovating. And that I don't care what that person over there, like the man and the president, why won't they just do what we say? He's told, you can tell from everything else he says that he's a guy that's just like, I'm going to do what I can do where I'm at, and I'm going to roll on, and I'm going to trust that that's going to do more than being angry at those people up in politics or whatever. I'm just going to start
more enjoyable.
Yeah, because I'm actually seeing something move and go forward.
Right.
It kind of reminds me, this is a side note, but someone asked me one time point blank, is there any law in the Bible that says it's a sin to have more than one wife? And I'm like, no, there's not. There's not one law in the Bible that says you can't have more than one wife. They're like, so why is it a sin to have more than one wife? And I'm just like, if you're reading the Bible like it's a law book, it's not a law. But if you read the Bible for what it really is, it tells you pretty explicitly that it's a dumb idea. And they're like, what are you talking about? There's no rule that says you can't. I'm like, have you read the story of Jacob and his wives and how they hated each other? And then David and all his wives and how his sons all killed each other so they could be
rule that comes from the narrative that we're provided with.
Right. And you're just like, can you please read the story of Rachel and Leah and tell me
why
the Bible's like, yes, this is a great idea. It's like, man, it's just so crazy that if you're reading the Bible. But anyways, I think it's the same thing with Paul Wheaton. Everyone is like, I want to know what he thinks about politics because that's what really matters.
Obviously affects.
Look at what he does every day, and it will scream to you what he thinks about politics.
Yeah.
Okay. So
I think people they're like, they see what he does every day and they're like, cool. What's his political stance that
Yeah, you're
makes
like,
him think
so
that
is
he
he
should do that?
so is he a Republican or a Democrat?
Oh, so he's an environmentalist. Is that what you're saying?
So he's a Democrat. Oh, okay. But
Like,
he's on
oh
like a
wait.
farm, so is he a Republican? But
Whereas
other people
he's
live on the farm, so
yeah,
he's a Democrat. It's like,
but
just
they
stop.
share things. So is he a socialist?
But then he's kind of like a capitalist, so I think he might be a Republican. I don't know. Like, everybody, please.
And he's just standing there like, no, I'm just getting stuff done that I think is effective and a better way to live. And
Yeah. I saw a quote today that it was from a local pastor, Church of Christ guy. I think it was something to the effect of, anyone who follows a party 100% of the time, no matter what they do, like, that is 100% idolatry.
hmm,
And you're just like, yeah, man, people, that's how people are though, man. It's
yep,
just like, I'm blindly following this thing and I can't question my own team
yeah,
because that's a God. You can't question a God.
right.
So you just gotta take whatever the God says and you gotta march the orders. So anyways,
Or try to backfill reasoning to make
right.
it make sense. Anyway, back
So
to the last episode.
I just thought that it was great that, they said that anytime we design anything,
Yeah,
it's a moral action. And I think as Christians, I think morals and ethics are obviously something that we are called to a very high standard in, and we really lack applying our morals and our ethics and our, not even more than that, like our ideals. Those are like, don't do that, that's immoral. I'm saying like the things that we believe in, the things that are positive, the things that are proactive, like baking those things into the things that we build and we create. That's even more important and more like inspiring to me. So it's not just a limiting, like, let's not do these things. It's like, let's do these things. And we
yeah,
talked about kind of the why, as far as like our building is preaching a sermon, just like Daniel sees, the Hilton headquarters, and it's just like, oh, they must care more about their patrons having a great experience at their hotel than, having a fancy corporate headquarters.
right.
That preached something to Daniel. And I'm asking you guys, what are our church buildings? What are the physical spaces that we gather in and design? What are they morally preaching out to the community? Are
Or
they
not preaching.
or not preaching? Yeah, or just absent on. And so, I see some churches like cathedrals, where they are awe-inspiring, and the other side of the coin is like, oh, all this money could have gone to the poor or to serve, um, the least of these. Which I understand. I understand what you're saying. Also, I don't think you can try to glorify God too much. And, there's two sides of that coin. If you're stuffing someone's pockets, that's one thing. Building something that's beautiful for beauty's sake, that brings people's hearts and imaginations and souls, and point them in the direction
Mm,
of Christ
mm,
and God. I can see it both ways, and I think that's why I take a different approach, as there's these other extremes of the churches of Christ where we grew up. We don't have stained glass. We don't have a preacher in fancy robes. We don't have icons of,
it's historically simplistic.
very simplistic, very just a box with no pictures, no
Right.
icons, no statues, no nothing fancy. And the only thing that you'll see engraved, or an icon, if you will, a graven image, is on the front of our communion table.
Mm.
It says, in God we trust? No, do this in remembrance
Well,
of me. Do this in
depends on where
remembrance
you're
of
at.
me. Or in remembrance of me, right?
Yeah.
And so
And then maybe a cross on the stage.
maybe the churches I grew up in had no crosses,
Yeah.
no American flags, no nothing, except for maybe two fake plastic plants on each side of the that's it.
Make you feel homey.
So we'll go through some of that stuff and talk about what do those things communicate in some of those spaces. But what I want to get to before that is just talk about what do you think that the churches we see here and there, it could be a church that we've been in and a part of, or others are communicating? Because I think you could go from cathedral to Church of Christ building where it's very, very simple on purpose. There's also this kind of third category of the mobile church of using reclaimed spaces like middle schools and high school auditoriums and, places that the church doesn't own, and it's not the church's, all
Right.
that is on their shoulders. So they're more
Right.
nimble and more quick, but they also can only be there once a week. So it's kind of like a nomad's
No one feels
approach to,
at home. It's not like
right.
this is our building. It's
So you
just
got to
a
set up the
space
chairs,
that
set up the
yeah.
AV stuff every week, and do that whole grind. And so, what does that communicate? So do you want to talk about some of those different options, and what do you think the average person driving down the road sees, and what does it say to them, just like the Hilton headquarters said something to you?
Yeah. And I think we talked about this a little bit. We didn't get as far as we'd hoped on this question, but if we repeat ourselves, I'm sorry. Sort of also not sorry. But yeah, I actually was talking to my dad about this while we were in town. And can we kind of talk through, the churches of Christ specifically, and honestly, several different Protestant denominations come from whatever the high church was doing, we want to do the opposite.
The opposite, yeah. So it's like
So
the Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, the Lutheran Church, anyone that had a high liturgy.
yeah,
It was very much like, I don't know if it actually happened like this, but seriously, you can look at what they do and
and
then do the opposite, and you would
right,
get something that looked a lot like the Church of Christ. Now, whether they did that on purpose, consciously, subconsciously, I'm not sure exactly all
yeah.
the time.
And that was honestly like a two-part move. So first was from like pulling away from the Catholic Orthodox traditions, where a church building, they did the sacred really, really well. And you see that if you go to Europe and some cities here in the US still, if you go and you look at these churches that are just amazing, like the amount of money that they raised and the level of artists that they used and the materials that they used, it wasn't about being cost effective. It was about building a sacred space for us to do what we do, which is worship the Almighty God. And so, there's the level of respect, and it's like the city on the hill metaphor, where it's almost like too far up the hill to where it's irrelevant, and where people that are not a part of that body feel like they don't belong. This place is too fancy for them. And those places, they usually had really great ministries that were separate and apart from the main church building where they met, where they had, soup kitchens and things like that. So I'm not saying they didn't care about the poor and the powerless, but the building spoke like, this is a sacred space. There's no running around afterwards with kiddos. There's no, like, you dress up and you're respectful and you are quiet. And this isn't for you. This is for God. And then, so Protestant Reformation, it's just anything other than that. And then you get the Reformation in the States with the Campbells and Martin Stone, where they're saying even some of the stuff that like the Presbyterian Church, was where they come from, was doing, was too set apart, to this is a crude way of saying it, but too sacred, to like that it was too high church. Yeah. And so they brought it to even a lower level, where it was like, we're just going to sit outside and have these like tent revivals and everyone can have their own Bible, and everyone can, interpret scripture for themselves. And we're going to go super simplistic. The whole goal was to be the apostles again, to be the early church again, to be the church that was started when Jesus left, and that Paul, the type of churches that Paul would plant, which would be, in someone's house or a modest building, some central location. And it wasn't about that. It was about the believers meeting together. And so there's almost like two parts to that.
Right. And remember that the Catholic Church at this time was still in Latin in many places.
Yeah.
And so it was even a language that the people can understand. So it's very much like the priest, everything comes through the priest. There's no encouragement to go home and read your own Bible and, see if the priest, is telling the truth. It's a very much us, the lay people down here and the clergy up there.
Right.
And the restoration movement was kind of like, if the Spirit
comes on somebody,
if the lightning bolt strikes that person and they are all strikes against them as far as who is powerful and who is the head of society, if a white rich male, I'm trying to think something, landowner, if that was the person who is running society, it could be a 10-year-old black slave girl. And if the Spirit struck her like with lightning with some of the stories they tell, and she falls on the ground, has this experience of, the Spirit that they perceived, and jumps up and starts proclaiming the word of God, like she is just on equal footing as anyone else.
Right.
Because she has had an encounter with God where he has, chosen her to do that thing. Well, then moment, everyone step aside. Like this is someone we need to listen to. Right. So so let's get back to the buildings instead of the practices. But
right. That's what I was trying to kind of circle around to, like that. A lot of that came from, think about the history of what it's a pendulum that was swinging, we got really fancy ornate buildings to like the most modest possible.
Mm-hmm.
But in our attempts to be really, to have really modest buildings that we meet in, we often have created buildings that are really boring and dull
and aren't very
uncomfortable.
Yeah, they're not very inspiring.
Yeah, and it's a type of building that you wouldn't want to go to it for any other reason, if that makes sense. Like you spend time in there on Sunday and Wednesday because you have to, but you would never choose to. And occasionally a church will have like a really pretty chapel of some kind that people use for weddings, or they may just use the auditorium because it's, it's that building has become home and stuff like that, and they make it look really nice. But generally it's like, this place is pretty dull and drab. And so to me, in a lot of ways, I love my heritage and where I come from and all that, and I'm not going anywhere, but I will say pretty much every church building I've ever been in our tradition has bored me or been like, it doesn't seem like anybody really cares about what this space looks like.
Right.
It doesn't seem like this isn't communicating anything positive. This just reinforces for a lot of my friends. And I went to private Christian school, and a lot of my friends didn't go to church often, if at all. They maybe went Christmas, Easter type. And so for them, I couldn't argue with but church is just like so boring and like uncomfortable. It's like, yeah, it kind of is. Like I couldn't be like, no, you don't understand. Like, come to my church and you'll realize. Just like, yeah. And I think it diminished the power of the gospel in some ways. We were getting in our own way.
And you may, get some people that are like, I really appreciate that you built this building as cheaply as possible so that more effort can be put into ministry and pastoring and, salaries or just ministry. But I think that there's a way to do all that and still have something really beautiful. And that's kind of where my mind has constantly worked, because I'm a cheapskate too. I want to be really responsible with money too, but I also want there to be something that's like inspirational and wonderful and good that we're meeting in a space that makes us feel, like I said in the last episode, like our true nature, our true humanness is able to be encouraged in that space and brought
Yeah.
out of us in that
Yeah.
space, instead of it like, this place frustrates me and I don't know, every time I come in here I feel like just ADD,
Smells
my
weird.
brain's, like whatever it may be that's making us just not rest into that place. I think that we need to design it differently. But what we often do as in the churches of Christ, keeping it really, really simple, really, really straightforward, nothing fancy, we're usually, the moral we're baking into that is that cheaper is better, and what's the bottom line, just like, let's do this on the cheap and just roll on. But when we do it on the cheap, we're actually, in the churches of Christ, we're typically doing it on the build on the cheap, but the maintenance, the ongoing perpetual bills that are attached to that building are actually not cheap, because the true cost will come through with that electric bill, with the heating and cooling costs and all this kind of stuff. That cost is not considered. We don't have the foresight. So basically our moral call is, let's do this really short-sightedly and very cheaply. Let's not consider who it affects, like who made these bricks, where did this concrete come from, how it affected the environment, how much energy it's going to use over the course of its lifetime, what good it's going to do, during the week while it's not church, and, all these other questions. We have somehow just wanted to impress the person who's going to go, that's good, let's keep it real chill, because those Catholics, they put all this ornate stuff in theirs, and that's immoral, because their morals are all whacked out. See, the Catholics bake their morals into it too,
Right.
but our moral call was to keep it cheap and simple, in order to be like, those are not our morals. Those, to keep it beautiful and inspirational and big and expensive, and it's like, this is a gift for God, or to honor God, we're going to put all of these resources and time into it. We were like, no, we're going to put our time and resources back into helping real people, not just putting rocks on top of each other that are beautifully carved, which I can understand that, but like I said, it's short-sighted. And so what I want to start with today is get down to the real nuts and bolts of, if I were to build a church building that honored the triple bottom line of, how does this affect our wallet? And that's a two-part question. How does this affect our wallet today and for the rest of time? Number two, how does it affect other people? And I'm not just, that's the people that occupy the building and all the people who made the materials that go into building the building. And then third, the environment, and how does it affect the thing that God has made, and is it treating it well?
Yeah.
And so that's something that I would like to kind of back up and talk about, because I think we can build something beautiful that preaches a loud message. And then when people are like, yeah, but it costs all this money, be like, whoop, pause it. It didn't. It actually costs just as much as your cheap building, but you killed the beauty of it. You didn't think forward enough. You just built it cheap today, but it's going to have these huge weights around your shoulders to maintain it for the rest of its life. And I'm not just talking about heating and cooling. I'm talking about, this thing's going to break every 5 seconds, and this carpet's going to wear out, and this, this paint's going to peel off, and everything is going to have this life cycle that's so short because you get it so cheaply.
One question that comes to my mind which you may be getting to this eventually. I just think, thinking critically, I wonder how much of, I'm sure it's a lot, but how much of how some of our buildings have been put together have been limited based on codes and zoning and all of that jazz.
I
Just as
I
if I
think
think like critically, like if my dad is a real estate lawyer, so if I put as much as I know about what he does and what all entails, if I pretend to be him for a second, my first thought would be like, it all sounds really great, but I think some people have been limited in the past. And yes, they weren't thinking through it. They're just trying to put up what made sense in there. Like they're thinking in one box. But a part of me thinks like, to be up to snuff, do they have to build, put in this system or this, HVAC or whatever that was actually extremely inefficient, but that's just like they had to do it that way, or they had to pave this many parking spots because that's how they didn't think outside of paving, but just in terms of how much of the land is the building and how much of the land is the parking lot. Like
right.
there are requirements on that as far as how big the building can be. And so I don't know. You may have answers to that, but my brain goes there to like,
Yeah, there's definitely
I'm
some.
pretty sure there's a lot of limits, unfortunately, that
Uh, Sometimes tie goes to the runner. If they don't have code for something, then they can. You just have to be up to code to everything that has code.
right,
So if there's something that doesn't have a code, they won't require anything on it because tie goes to the runner. But other times, if it's not, especially in a commercial building where the public gathers, like a church building,
mm-hmm.
there's some more stiff rules about what can the doors be made out of, because it's got to have a fire rating of
Right,
1 hour or more so that people can escape the building in case of a fire. But which is ironic because you're talking about a B plan for when your stick frame building catches on fire. When you could build it out of something. I'm not saying don't have doors that are fire rated. I'm just saying like why
That's a band-aid too. Why
yeah,
not just fix
let's just
the
address build it out of something that can't catch on fire. But anyways, I think that some of those things are true, but also a lot of those hurdles are hit because no one wants to be the first one to pay the money to actually have the laboratory do the test on this better technology that treats
right,
people better, the environment better, and the end users better, and the wallet, the budget better. They don't want to be the first ones to run that past a government approved laboratory to say, no, this is actually just as good or better.
right.
And it treats, that person in wherever else that builds these things, the environment itself, all down the list better. And so that's just us. And then past that, I'm not going to go to heaven one day. Sorry. I'm not going to be standing in front of God one day.
Way to stop that sentence.
Yeah, I'm not going to stand in front of God one day and him say, "Why should I let you into heaven?" and me say, "I never got arrested," and him say, "Okay, great, come on in." That what's legal and not legal, it has no that's not how I choose to govern myself and my
Hmm.
life.
Hmm.
I govern me and my life based on what I think is true and right and good according to God. If the government is requiring me to heat my building with fossil fuels that are fueling a war that's killing innocent people in the Middle East, then I'm out. I'm out. I don't
Hmm.
care what they say. I don't care what they're requiring me to do. And if they want to arrest us, take us to jail, do all that stuff, or they want to provide us some kind of exemption because of our religious, thoughts that they want to make exemptions for that, then so be it. But I'm not going to make my decision based on some code man in Nashville. And I don't say that to be mean or mean-spirited or looking for a fight. But if my faith calls me to do something different and that's not legal, that's not my measuring stick for how I should conduct myself in this lifetime. And I hope, just like the Amish and some other people that have special tax laws and other laws that exempt them from doing what all the rest of us would go to jail for. Why? Because they, as a people, said this is not how we're going to do it. If you don't pay your taxes, you'll go to jail. But they don't pay Social Security tax. They don't do those things because they took Social Security on themselves. They already have their own program. And so they're exempted from being a part of that because of their religious beliefs. And a lot of us bail out and are cowardly, and we bow down to the state so quickly because, if the state says so, it must be the best way. And that is not true. That's not the case. And I believe this with all my heart. I believe Scripture teaches that the saints will judge angelic beings one day. We'll sit on the judgment seat on their behalf and decide what their eternal fate is going to be. And if we can't, we have to be able to take on more serious tasks than who we're going to hand lollipops out to. There has to be some church can take on than, whether we're going to give the kids in our neighborhood, Keebler elf cookies or Cheez-Its.
Yeah.
There's got to be more, and we've got to be able to take on more. We have to be a front runner, and that's what everyone, it seems like in the progressive side of things, like church needs to be a front runner. Church needs to be a front runner in race and in politics and all these other things. Just like, well, let's do it. And so I want to be a front runner when it comes to the buildings we build and what they speak. So let me start with how other theologies have shaped other people's buildings and then work back to the theology that I'm working with.
Let's start there.
So for a very long time, most traditions over the last 2,000 years have kind of bounced back and forth between two major focuses: the sermon and communion, the word being preached, and the table where we take communion and gather as the people of God around, the table. So if you were to come into a Catholic church, you would look straight down the center aisle, and the first thing you would see at the very highest point would be a crucifix, Jesus hanging on the cross. And then directly underneath that, his head would probably be bowed, and looking down at the table where we commune. And if you go to a Catholic service or any other high church service, it is an ornate,
Lots
procedure.
of ritual.
Procedure that they go through, ritual they go through that's beautiful, and as they bless it and administer to the congregation the sacraments of here is the body of Christ, here's the blood of Christ. And it's a beautiful ritual. And typically the sermon, the word of God, that part, usually the pulpit, I don't know if that's actually the lectern, where they stand and preach from, is usually off to the side.
I think almost always. I think that's, or maybe always.
And so then where's the baptistry? The baptistry in those churches typically out in the lobby or as you're coming in to the sanctuary. And what is that? That maybe communicates like to come into this experience, like you need to be baptized, and then you come to the table of God, and then, the preaching teachings kind of secondary to the table. You're like, okay. And not to say that they don't think highly of the word of God. But, I'm just saying it's usually that way. But in a Church of Christ or other kind of evangelical churches, this is how our buildings were always laid out. The baptistry was front, center, and high. It was front, it was center, and it was the highest point, just like the crucifix. Then where the preacher preaches from was, right beneath or in front of that place.
Sometimes off to the side.
I've only seen one Church of Christ building on the side, and it was still to give more focus to the baptistry and the window where
Right.
you would see people go up and get baptized.
The
Then
side pulpit was my granddad preferred that, I think.
okay. And then
Move.
typically in front of that was the communion table. And so you would have people that would administer, you know, the communion to all the congregates from there. So for us, baptism was really regarded highly in our architecture. It was just like, boom, right there. We're trying to get more people
very
to
clear.
come to the water. This is important to us. We don't have it out in the lobby. It's right here.
Right.
I've seen one Church of Christ, Woodmont Hills. They have a baptistry in the front center, I think, of their stage and out in the lobby. So I don't know what they were trying to say with that, but there's one out in the lobby as well. And I don't know if it's something that they thought about a lot or someone thought about it way back when, and then we just kept building it that way. And the second, third generations didn't know why. We were just like, this is how we've always done it.
Yeah.
But those are just some examples. Another one, if you've ever heard of the Shakers before. Do you know anything about the Shakers?
Because of you.
Like just because of me. So we live in Tennessee.
You went to a Shaker village for a while.
Yeah. And
for a week or something.
North of here is Kentucky. And so in Kentucky, there's still, they've restored and preserved a village up there that the Shakers built. And a couple things you'll notice. Their worship space where they would come together had two sides for males and females. And they had this ritual of singing and like swapping sides basically, and kind of singing where they're like marching around the room. And the males and the females end up on different sides of the room and all this stuff. Well, back in the day, if you had like a column every 5 feet holding up the roof in the middle of the room, they couldn't really do their worship thing the way that they wanted to. And so therefore they came up with this really intricate way of basically building like a suspension bridge to where that first floor could be completely open with no supports.
Wow.
And then there was only like columns in the second and third story of the building. So they could have that free to move worship space. Whereas my church growing up, we had bolted to the floor pews, right? So we're not really moving anywhere.
Around. Yeah.
We're not going anywhere. We're just here
bolted
to
the
listen.
Floor, and if you weren't bolted to the pew, you're gonna get smacked.
And they also didn't have their a cappella singers like the Churches of Christ are. So there wasn't any place for the band or for the extra stuff. It was just people. And the acoustics in there were incredible. So the singing, man, the singing was so great. This is pre-electricity, all this kind of stuff. Now the way we build our Church of Christ buildings, which is so interesting to me, is we still practice not using instruments, but acoustically our buildings are so terrible.
So bad. Yeah.
And you can just be screaming and giving your heart, like, you know, and in hopes that it's honoring God and encouraging the brothers and sisters. And it may be honoring God, but you can all be bringing it, but these rooms are just eating the sound.
Right.
And as it eats the sound, it feels like no one cares. Everyone's apathetic. Everyone walks away just feeling like, why doesn't anyone...
No one was singing today.
No one was singing today. And it's just like, why? Why, if this is such an important practice of ours, are we building buildings that eat sound instead of encourage it to bounce around? I felt like at the Shaker Village, they did a great job of that. Then the Shakers also believed that they were living in the 1,000-year reign of Christ.
Right.
And so if you look at the dorms that they lived in, which by the way, they didn't get married, and they have dorm like, you know, setups where there's little apartment rooms and, you know, all this kind of stuff. If you look at a window that's facing the outside, you could like have a bedroom just on the windowsill because the walls are so thick and the window is so deep set into the thick wall. You're like, why did they build these like walls like 8 feet thick? So crazy. But for them, they felt like they were living in, it needed to last for 1,000 years, that they're in the millennial kingdom, and that these houses they were building, these dorms they were building, they didn't need to get married anymore because like Jesus was coming soon.
Right.
They needed these houses to last for 1,000 years.
They didn't need quick apartment complex thrown up.
Just throwing it up and Jesus coming back tomorrow.
Jesus
coming,
castle,
but it's going to be in 1,000 years he's coming.
Right.
So you just see that, I mean, these people did some amazing things. They had running water in their little village Kentucky, which back then was the Wild West, literally the
Right.
Wild West. Like as far as a lot of people had gone, as far as settling,
Yeah.
they had water, running water before the White House did. And
Yeah.
it's all coming out of their theology of like, this is who we are. And because of that, it's going to reflect itself in the things that we build. I just thought
Right.
that was great. The other ones are the Quakers. They had this practice of we're all going to be quiet and listen to the Spirit for like 15 minutes to an hour. Literally sit in a room for an hour. No one planned a sermon, from what I understand. No one planned songs or scriptures or any other worship flow like plan. You be quiet for like an hour. You sit there and ask God, like, what do you want me to share to admonish my brothers and sisters in Christ? And if the Spirit says, shut your mouth, you talk too much, then that's what you do. And if he puts a song on your heart, then that's what you offer up. If it's a prophetic word, you offer it up. If it's, reading the scripture, reminding people that in our current situation with pop culture and whatever, this is what you need to hear right now, then say
Right.
that. And
Right.
they sat in a big square where all the seats faced in towards each other. And there was no preacher, the upfront person didn't exist. It was just these people offering up their songs, their psalms, their readings, their prophecies, and their admonishing. And I just think like, whoa, that's really dangerous, right? Because what if Daniel's a weirdo and he walks off the street and he meditates for 15, 30 minutes and he's like, I feel like this is what God wants me to say.
And you're like,
Like,
whoa, except for
oh,
you.
who gave this guy the mic? / we don't have a mic because we built this room to not need mics. And I just think that was such a practice of like trusting the Spirit was going to move in God's people. It's like, wow, it's cool. So,
and trusting, there's a lot of trust there that we are all individually seeking God enough and studying as a community and individually enough that if said crazy person comes in and says something crazy, we can all say, thank you, brother. Thank you, sister, for your word. Yep. And we can all kind of filter that and say,
right.
like, we trust the Spirit
Enough.
But if something happens that's like, we're not shaken by that.
Right. And the leaders of the church have to take on that risk. And if someone says something that is just straight up blasphemy or
Right.
a heresy, to be like, well, I may hear where you're coming from. I'm sure you may dislike these people that have wronged you so much, but at the end of the day, what we all have to commit to is that Christ died for the ungodly, that we are to bless those who curse us, and to correct that, that thing that was spoken, if it was so far off of what Christ is all about. But we don't want to have to correct people in public or call people out or even do it with grace and in truth, because it's awkward.
It is.
And so instead it's like, let's keep it scripted. Let's keep the great, crazy people off the stage. You know what I mean? All that. Let's put barriers around who can share in this body. And the Church of Christ may seem like we're like, oh, we don't, that whole clergy thing and the priest and the fancy robes and all this kind of stuff. We may think that we have totally done away with that system, but we have not totally done away with that system. Because if you can't, if anyone at any point in the getting together of God's family can't grab the mic, grab the mic, whatever that looks like, but be up front for a moment and say something because God's put it on their heart, then you have still built a wall around the power structure of, this,
Who's in charge here?
The sacred up there spot. Yeah.
Right.
That clergy level, like you're not allowed to say anything or speak or get on. Just like if you go to Target and grab the little microphone and be like, we got to clean up on aisle 13. Like they're going to get mad at you, right? Because you don't work there. And it's the same thing at church. So how can we build buildings that speak a different truth, encourage a different thing? So this is what I want to get to, like the nuts and bolts of if Nathan were to build a building that preached a different sermon.
Bring it, dude.
Okay. So where I think go to immediately is like, what are the first principle thoughts of like, what do I want to build? And what are things that will last and endure? Because I believe the church will endure forever. And I'm not saying we can build buildings that last forever. I think building shoddy buildings that don't last forever really is a confusing message to people learning about God. So I think about things that last a really long time. So what are some things in your brain, like, that have you've traveled the world, you've been to Europe, you've been to places where people have lived there more than 200 years, like in America. I mean, you know what I'm saying, where they've built major structures. What to you are things that, you know, are thousands of years old that you have seen and you've been like, dang, how did it last that long?
Pyramids.
Okay.
Are you talking about like specific structures
Yeah,
or
specific structures.
materials? Yeah, pyramids, Taj Mahal, um, Angkor Wat, Angkor Wat in Cambodia, Mayan ruins, Machu Picchu. Lots of big rocks.
Okay, so there's a
Things
lot of
with lots of big rocks.
okay, a lot of stone involved.
Yeah.
One of those had
Other Egyptian things other than pyramids have
the
also
things
lasted.
that are interesting to me are like the aqueducts.
Yeah.
There's also a dome, still the largest non-rebar, just straight concrete, no rebar dome in the world is still the Pantheon, and it's over 2,100 years old.
It's in Rome.
It's in Rome, so it's a dome shape. So for me,
Other things in Rome, Colosseum, it's pretty
right,
much falling apart, but that was humans' fault. That wasn't naturally occurring.
right. So you got things made of stone, and for me, the strongest shape there is a triangle.
Hmm.
In geometry. It's the strongest thing there is. A table with 3 legs can't wobble. It's impossible. Think about that for a minute. Why do we build 4-leg tables? I don't know, but this is the problem I'm talking about. We should only build 3-leg tables. There's literally no reason. They can't wobble. What's wrong with us? But anyways, the triangle is the strongest shape. In architecture, 3D shapes, the arch is very, very strong as well. And if you can't live under a huge, you know, arch all the time. That's called a vault. But the strongest shape there is if you take an arch and rotate it 360 degrees, you get a dome. And so for me, there's different types of domes, but one is called a monolithic dome. It's where you pour the dome all at once. It's only about 10 inches thick, but you pour it all at once, and when it's done, it's done. And it's super, super, super strong. And I'll tell you more about it in a second. But then you can't see through it because it's all concrete. So on the other side of the building, I would have like more half monolithic dome of concrete and half geodesic dome, because geodesic domes are made out of a bunch of triangles, which are the strongest geometric shape. And that would be made of glass.
Just so I'm on the same page, monolithic domes, they sometimes use those for like water treatment tanks and stuff, right?
They do all, yeah, they can even hold like under pressure, like natural gas and other things, but yes.
Okay.
So you may see there's some states that have like salt storage for salting the roads and all that stuff underneath geodesic domes that are made out of metal. But these things are super, super strong, and they last a really, really long time, because concrete lasts, like in the Pantheon, that was made out of Roman concrete, which a lot of people say our modern concrete's even better than that. So when we're using concrete, we're saying we want this thing to stick around for a second.
Right.
So for me, another thing that we disregard all the time is that the sun comes up in the same place every day and goes down in the same place every day. But we don't build our buildings saluting the sun as if the sun were an irrelevant factor to how we build our lives. It's kind of like
complain about it.
Yeah, it's like an
try to make Band-Aid fixes.
It's an ultimate just denial of the situation that we're in, and I'm going to do what I want to do. It's like, no, look, if you want to actually work with the world instead of against it, and swim downstream instead of upstream, in the hemisphere that we're in, or sorry, the part of the, you know, above
Right. Yeah.
the equator, the sun comes up in the east, it flies in the south all day, and it goes down in the west. If you're below the equator, it comes up in the east, it goes across the north, and it goes down in the west. Okay. And to not face your house towards the sun, the thing that keeps all life living on planet Earth, is just foolishness. So a lot of us, pardon me, a lot of us don't build our homes according to something that's called passive solar design.
Mm.
So in the summertime, I'm getting technical here, guys, but if you care, here it comes. In the summertime, the reason the days are longer is because the sun goes like straight up and straight down over. Like if you look up at noon, the sun's going to be like right above your head, not to the south and in front of you.
Right.
At the shortest day of the year in December, the sun is still coming up in the east and going down in the west and flying through the southern sky.
But it's still going to be south of you.
It's still south of you, but it's going to be low in the sky, lower in the sky, and it's making a shorter path because it's not going from east to west. It's going from like southeast to southwest.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? It's making a shorter path across.
Right.
So in the summertime, the sun, our shadows are straight underneath us, like at noon.
Right.
But even at noon in December, we have a long shadow to the north behind us.
Yeah.
And so what that means is that if you place the windows in a building to where in the summertime it's hot, so do you want a lot of sunshine coming in? No. You want to have it to where the sun is blocked when it's right overhead. But in the wintertime, you want to have it to where when that sun is at a low angle, now it's colder. You want as much sunlight to come in as possible.
Right.
So you would allow there to be windows that in the winter months, the sun comes in, hits like a dark floor, because remember, dark colors absorb more heat than reflect, like white does. So, and then that would like heat up the floor. So then at night when it gets cold and the sun goes away, the floor is like a battery that stores heat.
Yeah.
And it leaks it out in the daytime, or sorry, the nighttime from what it gained in the day.
Right.
So in the church that I'm thinking about, what you would do is on the northern side, that's the cool side, not sun side. Just work with me here. If you're from Australia and you're listening, just substitute north and south. But we're off. Yeah, let's just work with south for now because most of us live here. But you would have that side of the building in
North
concrete, the north side, and it would not only be concrete, but it would actually be buried under soil. So it's called bermed. It's a bermed northern side.
How many feet under are you talking?
We're talking about
like how far up the building is the soil going?
It would get a little thinner as it goes to the top to reduce the load. But because domes are so strong, it can take that weight on top. You could drive cars on top. You could technically park on top of the building, but you just have to make the concrete a bit thicker. But I would say 2 feet of dirt at the very, very top. And then it gets a little, instead of it sloping perfectly with the dome, the northern side would slope off at like a one direction roof. And so the soil gets a little bit bigger as the dome underneath slants down to the ground. It's like a constant hill that goes. And what
that being buried is going to keep it cool.
Right.
In addition to not having the sun directly shining on it.
That's right. So the benefit of the berm is that it also acts like a big battery, to where in the summertime, that ground is basically the ground temperature a couple feet down is always going to be, you take every day of the year, the high temperature and the low temperature, and average it, then take 365 averages and average all those, and you'll get the temperature of the ground year round. Okay, so you'll do that. And instead of having to move the temperature in your building from it's 100 degrees outside, we want to get it down to 68, or it's 30 degrees outside and we want to get it up to, 70, you're probably going to be around 55, and you're trying to take the temperature from 55 to 70 instead of, it's super hot and bring it down, or super cold and bring it up. It's already holding the building's temperature right there,
both in winter and in summer.
You can make it next. That's right. And so in the summertime, heat always rises. So you would have at the very top of the dome something you could open, and then you would have tubes that parallel the ground and go back through your berm. And so that when the heat rises through the top of the dome, because all the
like
heat goes up,
a vacuum.
it pulls in cold air. Sorry,
Yeah.
it pulls in hot air, but then it gets cold as it comes through that berm tube.
Yeah.
And the hotter it gets, the more suction and the more cold air it pulls in through the berm. So literally the worse the problem gets, the better it gets, because more heat, more flow, and then you're pulling in more cold air. So from there, the geodesic dome is also super strong. It's very light. In general, domes use like 30-40% less material to build than this is just on the building side. It's the most efficient way for you to encase, 100, volume, cubic feet. The most efficient way you can do it is not with a box. It's in a sphere shape.
Yeah.
So if I have 100 cubic feet, in my building, the building that's square has to have more surface area to get that same space inside.
Two questions.
Yeah.
One, would for the dome to be as effective, does it have to be dome from the ground and all the way up? Or could you have an 8-foot wall start the dome? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. That still works, because here's one other cool effect of, if you just take a sheet of paper, okay, and try to stand it up on its side on your desk, do you think you could do that?
No.
Okay. If you roll up that same piece of paper, not crinkle it up, but just roll it up in a tube and then put it on the desk, it's strong. So it's inherently strong. Like within itself, like you could probably get 2 pieces of paper and tape them together in the corner and get that to stand up. 3 would be better, 4 would be best.
But it would still be pretty weak.
A curved wall in and of itself, it's inherently strong. So even in, like you said, if you had a round wall underneath, it went straight up for 10, the first story, and then you start your dome on top of that, it's not as good, but it is still round in one direction. It's not round in all, like a sphere is round in all directions. So it's good. It's not as good.
Yeah.
But it's still good.
Okay. So second question, for a church building, you could just have one open dome room for an auditorium. But if you're thinking of like a house or even classroom area at a church, or like if you want to have some other meeting spaces somewhere, does it mess up the heating, cooling features? Does it make the dome less efficient to build in a second level within the dome?
Okay.
See what I'm saying?
Let me take one step back and then answer that question.
Okay.
So because a sphere, a dome, a half of a sphere is a dome, is the most efficient way to encase cubic feet, that means not only like the structure itself is going to use less material, less time, but to heat and cool that space is also more efficient, because you don't have, anytime there's a wall, it's basically a way that heat can get out of a building.
Right.
So if you have a cube that has 6 sides, there's a lot more surface area that's touching the outside, and that means more air can get out, more energy can get out.
Right.
Does this make sense?
Yep.
So if the wall is a bridge between the air you want to keep and the air that's going to slip out somehow, there's less bridges of, less surface area for heat and loss there in a dome. So it's going to be cheaper in that way. It's going to be cheaper to build, cheaper to heat and cool. Also, air moves really freely within a totally rounded space because
Right.
there's no corner for it to like hit and get stuck. Like if you look at the top corner of a room or the bottom corner of a room where three surfaces are coming into each other, those are always kind of like dead spots as far as like circulating air and, you know, things
Yeah.
moving freely.
Yeah.
That's where the cobwebs are. Which I think is my theory, that there wouldn't be any cobwebs in a dome because the spider would be like, where's the corner?
Where do I connect?
That's just a theory. I don't know.
Funny.
But yeah, air flows really well around
Okay.
inside of it. And also that's why domes stand up really, really well to the outside circumstances, because if you take a kite, you have, you know, one big surface and it's catching wind. Now imagine a flat side of a building that's huge and a wind that's coming through, how much pressure that's putting on a kite.
Yeah.
Now imagine if you had a kite that's like a contact lens and, you know, it's flared up into the sky, it can't ever catch enough air. Maybe if it was flipped the other way where it's like a cup
like
facing
a
the wind.
parachute. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a parachute. But if you do the other way around, you couldn't even get it off the ground.
Air slides off of it. Yeah.
Right. And so that's how hurricanes, so domes can basically withstand F5 hurricanes and tornadoes because the wind can't catch a flat surface enough to put enough, you know, pressure on it to do anything. It just flows, it goes splits and flows right around. It can't do anything with it. That, and you're buried underground halfway on the northern side of the building. And that's going to help, like, again, with the temperature control and all that kind of stuff as well. The berm does a lot of good things, and you can grow beautiful things. And this building itself look like it's just a part of nature. It's just a hill rising, you know, in the distance. And it doesn't have to look like it's this man-made thing. And I think that honors God and trying to settle our architecture into nature, knowing that, like, I'm not as smart as God. He's done some beautiful things in nature. The Fibonacci, the golden ratio, all that stuff is so beautiful and so good. I want to imitate, you know, it's called biomimicry. I want to look at the way, you know, we've figured out some things that we've been figuring out for years. And we're like, what is the most aerodynamic thing ever? And then we're like, try this, try this, try this. And then we look at like a humpback whale's fin. And we're like, huh. And when we try that, and we're like, well, that's it.
There's the one.
There's the one. And you're like, come on, guys. Like, let's look at biomimicry and stop being so prideful. So those are some of the things that I would really want us to look at. And a couple of the things that we need to really think about are like, what is our solar allowance? What is a solar allowance? The solar allowance is how much sun falls on a property within a day. That's the allowance that we're getting from the sun every day. And we blow that allowance and go like 1 billion times over our allowance all the time.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate because in every square foot, a foot by a foot of sun, there's 1,000 watts of potential energy. And, you know, whether it's solar panels or you're doing something with big magnifying glasses or, you know, with heat, you know, there's so, like on our building here, there's so much electricity that could be made off the roof space of our flat roof church building. And if you look at the paved surface of the parking lot we have, if 1 inch of rain falls, we're talking about like thousands of gallons of water. And we take both of those resources and we just flush them down the toilet. We're like,
or figure out ways to fix the problems to avoid dealing with it.
Right. And so I think that the church building needs to live within its solar allowance. So number one, like keeping the need really low because you are using the ground temperature and you are, you know, you're facing the sun in the winter time to where you're going to gain energy. You're doing all these things the smart way. And then the need for electricity goes way down. and therefore we can live within our solar allowance. And the building would harvest its own water, it would harvest its own electricity, and it would process its own waste. And the first two are not too hard to convince the city of. The last one is, if you believe in that the second law of thermodynamics is a real thing, and the energy can never be destroyed, but it's just changing forms, to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. What we as humans typically do is, we buy food, we use it, then we throw it away, or we poop it out and we cast it off in a way. And that is a linear way of thinking. You can never have an infinite amount of anything if you're using it and then throwing it away.
Right.
Because you'd have to have an infinitely large pile of gasoline or food or. But if you learn to take just 0.00001% of that infinite pile we're trying to pile up, so we'll never run out, and you learn how to take it from that waste back around into the beginning of the process, like, there's sunlight, it grows grass, the cow eats the grass, and then it poops it out after it uses it for food, and then the worm turns it back in, to great dirt for grass, and then the cow eats it again. Then you're running in a cycle.
Right.
If you're running in cycles, you have infinity, and it can be super small or large. But if you're using a line, you're just buying, using, throwing away.
Yeah.
And you'll eventually burn through everything. Like, it may be outside of your lifetime, but you'll eventually burn through everything unless you can create systems and circles. Yeah. So for me, the church building itself needs to be honoring that, like, God made a system. This is crazy to think about, that actually is perpetual.
Yeah.
Like, as far as this, as long as there's sunlight.
Right.
And he created this free thing that funds the whole program.
Right.
Every ounce of sunlight that comes down to us, every photon that comes to us. And it's like, if we can't build the system on that, we have free water, free sunlight, free air. And if we don't honor those three things and how we build the building, then we're just looking at the way God did it and be like, I could do better.
Yeah.
And I don't like that.
Or the way that he put it together is a pain. It's actually a hindrance. It gets in the way.
Right.
It gets in the way. So we just have to adjust to get around it.
I think we need to live in our solar allowance, and that comes from reducing the need. And then from there, I think we can, if we reduce the need enough, then the building can actually probably have an abundance of what it needs as far as water and electricity and all the things. And so then we can be, when the electrical grid goes out because a storm comes through, well, our building is still fine because the storm didn't hit us. We are still making electricity for the neighborhood. People can still come to our, house of worship and charge their cell phones and call their loved ones and tell them that they're okay. And then in those moments when the storm comes, the true wisdom of the church will shine through. We won't be the person begging for help and begging for money, and our wisdom being clearly displayed that our wisdom was actually foolish. But we'll be people that are like, man, we should be more like the church. We should rebuild our lives. Not like we just, we just had a tornado that knocked everything down. Why in the world would we build it the same way that we built it before the storm? Right. But we do it all the time. Yeah. It's like, this thing got destroyed by a storm. Let's get back to normal and put the roof back on and do it the same way. It's like, stop doing that, guys. We need to we don't need to rebuild. We need to recreate. Like, when we have an opportunity and our wisdom has really been shown to be foolishness, we need to make a change. So that's my opinion. And the other thing is, we really do need to, we need to design systems that the more people that come, the stronger it gets. Because that's what I saw in the Shaker Village. Why they failed was they took on widows, they took on orphans, they took on, people that God called them to take on. But the more people they took on, the more people took advantage of their generosity. It actually killed the community eventually. what we need to build are systems where the bigger it gets, the better it gets.
Right.
So that's something that geodesic like blow my mind, that the bigger a geodesic dome gets, I think it's the only architecture that the bigger it gets, the stronger it gets. So the guy that came up with the system, his name is Buckminster Fuller, which I just think is the coolest name ever.
So cool.
And so geodesic domes were nicknamed Bucky Balls because Buckminster Fuller was the guy that invented them. But he believed 100% you could put all of Manhattan, the whole island of Manhattan, underneath a geodesic dome, so that, you know, the Empire State Building, you know, everything, it could be underneath the dome. So no snow days, no bad weather days, like the economy could get, you know, roll on, not be affected by those bad winters in New York. And I just think that in the same way, we need to build systems where it's not just, one more mouth to feed.
Or to a point where we say, like, we can't take anything else.
Right. I think we actually need to build systems where it's like literally every time someone goes to the toilet, because we believe the energy can't be destroyed,
right,
it's actually adding to, you know, the program and the system, and it's going to generate more electricity, more energy. Better. It's just going to grow, you know, more food. I know this is weird. I want to go ahead and talk about this because you're like, is he insinuating that we grow food with human waste? The answer is yes and no.
Yes and no.
Okay, so if you look at what we grow food with in agriculture, industrial agriculture in America, the nitrogen that we use to grow food, which nitrogen is what causes like the green growth in plants, that typically comes from fossil fuel. Like, so we literally turn, like, it's from natural gas, I believe. But those nitrates we turn into fertilizer. And so we're actually you would think fertilizer is like manure and, you know, I don't know, you know, worm poop or something. But actually the way we grow our food in America is it's a cast off from, you know, a process of making gasoline and natural gas. And we put that on our fields, and that's the nitrogen that we use to grow our plants. Well, to do that, we got to keep drilling down. I don't know if you've ever researched how you get natural gas or oil, but it's a long process of drilling. People with high degrees and, you know, geologists, all this stuff going into it. Some people are out in the middle of the ocean on these, you know, oil rigs that are super fancy and high tech and drilling down, you know, hundreds and hundreds of feet through water and rock to get, you know, this stuff. It's just, it's such an incredibly complex system. And then I look at our urine actually has the same qualities of, it has nitrogen in it. It has trace minerals in it. And then you think about, like, our urine cannot be good for anything. We have to throw it away. It's disgusting. It's not good. You're like, okay, but when you say that, you're actually looking at God's system and saying your system is disgusting and gross and it doesn't work, because that's how fields grow. Animals eat the grass and they pee on the grass and it grows new grass. And yes, they do move on to other grass, and that breaks down and turns into other things, you know, that the plants need through bacteria and other things. But that's how it works, guys. I don't know how, I don't want to break it to you, but that's how God set up the program, is that poop and pee are the fertilizers that grow the food for the next go around. And standing in the same place and doing it all day, every day, that's not the program. That's what predators are for, that they chase the bison to the next field. They chase the thing to the next place. So you don't just stand in one place and kill it all.
Right.
So I totally agree with that. But to say that this is not valuable at all, if you take urine and you take wood ash, you've got a pretty good fertilizer right there. And both of those are just, we need to build the program based on the fact that there's a breathing, living human being. There's going to be these things around.
Right.
There's going to be poop. There's going to be pee. There's going to be wood ash from us, you know, heating homes or cooking food or whatever. You see what I'm saying? Like, those were all things that now we don't even know what to do with them, because we're so evolved and so above God's program that we're just like, that's gross. So what we do is we literally flush nitrogen fertilizer down the toilet that's totally free every single day, and everyone in your house is making it, so that we can go and drill and spend millions and millions and millions of dollars to go drill for it, process it, put it into trucks, and sell it back to you so that you can grow the garden out of something that you're flushing down the toilet every single day. And it's more complicated with number 2 than number 1, admittedly, but we're smart guys. And all that stuff can be put into a methane digester where these little bacteria eat it and burp out methane, which is flammable, which you can run engines off of, heat homes with, cook. There's so much you can do with it.
Right.
And the church has to put that on display for the world and say, you may be coy about this. This may be taboo. This may be strange. But when the day comes when everything's not perfect, or there's a pandemic, or there's a big storm, and there's, the status quo is challenged, then who will, this is the same thing as Luke, was it Luke 4? The wise man built his house upon the rock.
Mm-hmm.
Foolish man built his house upon the sand. The storm comes to both of them, but one of the two houses will falter and the other ones will stand. And who cares if it's weird to use pee to grow stuff? In the day where everything falls apart and your program is still going on and it's still strong and the storm did not affect it, that's the day that everyone will be like, maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was wrong. And maybe they have something. Yeah, it's Luke 6.
Luke 6.
Maybe they have a point,
Yeah.
And so we got to think about all the things that are inherent to human beings and use those things. We can heal.
Amen.
Yeah. So that brings me around to like rocket mass heaters and some other things. We can grow everything on the property that the people need, is for energy, for food, for water. We can do it all.
Yeah.
And I don't think people realize that even if the church had 10 acres and planted trees and did certain things, that alone can actually change local weather patterns. Just like plowing it all down and planting, and putting asphalt down also changes local weather patterns. And we just need to think about that stuff. I do have answers to all of your questions. I just know that I'm going to get super technical down in the details, and people will probably start to tune out because they're like, this is weird. And I know I just went off the reservation on this episode probably way too far. As soon as I said we can use human urine to change the world, everyone's like, well,
pause. I'm out.
I'm out. But it's like, I'm not talking about you have to bathe in it. I'm just saying that
drink it.
It can be put in the proper place and used to do good things, instead of being so foolish to why would you flush something down a toilet? By the way, a toilet that is full of potable, drinkable water, perfectly good to drink, and urinate in it, and take that precious resource of water and the precious resource of a nitrogen fertilizer that we go so far in other ways, even fight wars, literal wars over, kill other human beings for, and to flush that. What does God think about us every time we flush that down the toilet and say, ooh, gross?
Yeah.
That convicts me so much, because you look at the people that don't have drinkable water, or people that get sick every year because they don't have clean water to drink. It's so convicting every time we pee and flush it down the toilet. We're taking two incredible resources and saying, it's gross. Just send it away. It sounds like a king, like just a pompous king that's like,
send
gross.
It out of the castle.
Send it away. Give it to the peasants.
Yeah.
And so I don't like that at all. And I think that preaches a very, very bad message on our behalf. And it ignores God and ignores his creation and how he set up the entire world. So the last thing is this, and I'm going to keep it on like a big idea level instead of how it really plays out. But there's a book called The Marvelous Pigness of Pigs. The Marvelous Pigness of Pigs. It's written by a guy named Joel Salatin. Really appreciate him and his work. He's a good writer, but he also runs a farm, and that's what I really appreciate about him, is that he puts his words in action.
Yeah.
But Marvelous Pigness of Pigs, he describes if you don't pay attention to the way the world works, how God made it, then you'll constantly be struggling to, it's like a lie. You got to tell a bigger lie to cover up the
Mm-hmm.
little lie and a bigger lie and look over your shoulders, and you're paranoid, and it never
Right.
stops.
Right.
He talks about pigs. What do pigs love to do by their nature? They love to root around with their nose, dig up dirt. They like to eat things that they find. They like to eat almost anything and turn it into fertilizer. They
Right.
actually don't have any sweat glands, so if they want to get cool, they got to like wallow and make a little
Find
mud
some
hole for them to
cool mud.
stay cool.
Yeah.
And so that's what they like to do. But what we do to them is they're inclined to do all those things. We put them on concrete floors and covered industrial buildings, and so they can't root, so they get bored. When they get bored, they're so close together, and they're in a tight spot. They get curious, so they start to bite each other's tails, and they're like, "Oh, what's that?" And so they literally bite each other's tails off, and then that causes infection, and then they're standing in their own feces because they can't move on to the next place and let nature take care of that fertilizer and turn it into something good. And we have to cover up the infection with giving antibiotics and things that treat them for all these things. We have to cut their tails off when they're born so that they don't have a tail that another pig can eat because they're bored because they can't root around and dig. Does this all make sense?
Yeah.
And so we have to do all this work to do it the wrong way. And one of his quotes that I love is, if we're not willing to let a pig do its work, its natural work, then we will have to do the work of the pig.
Mm.
If you want to allow a pig to be a pig, you're going to look at your garden one day and be like, oh, I need to till this garden. And you're like, or you could just let a pig be a pig and let it till the garden for you.
Yeah.
Or you could look at your pond that doesn't hold water anymore, and it won't. You're suffering because of that. You're like, oh, I could go and buy a bunch of bentonite clay and slick the side of it, see if it'll hold water again, all this stuff. Or you could put a fence around it, put pigs down in it, and what they'll do is called gleeing. It's Gleying, gleeing, a pond. People back in the day used to like throw all their scraps and food down in there. The pigs would stay in the lowest part. They would make a little mud place for themselves, and as they do that, they're like perfectly sealing to where water can't get through, because they're taking that soil and breaking it down and just like they're plastering a wall.
Yeah.
And so then it would hold more water, and pigs don't particularly like to swim necessarily, so they stay at the rim and they glee that. And then it gets a little more water, and then it goes up and up and up until they've gleed the whole pond. And you can do it passively if you're just willing to let the pig be a pig. But because we don't do that, we've got to do all this other stuff, like buy a tiller, buy gasoline. And where's the gasoline come from? From Iraq. And what kind of war is involved or nastiness
Right.
involved with all that? Like whatever those consequences are.
Right.
So we do all this work when we could just put a pig in there and let it do it for us. But we don't want to, because that's gross, or however we feel about pigs.
Yeah.
And instead we make our life kind of hell, because we're constantly swimming upstream and we can't quite get ahead, because everything in the world that would want to do that job for us, we have it in a box somewhere in Iowa. And just, we just want it to be in cellophane packaged and ready to go for us. And so it's just, I think many, many, many times humans, just like the pigs, are in environments where we get testy, we get frustrated, we get bored, and we get violent, because we're constantly putting ourselves in boxes that we weren't meant to live in. We're constantly, staring at screens, and that wasn't our nature to do that 24/7. And it makes us lose our sense of being human, what it is to truly be human. And I want the church space that we build to be something that puts us in an environment that heals us, that brings us back to that thing that says something about just even standing here makes me feel right.
Right.
And I think for that reason, the inside of the church building on that side that has all glass should be an atrium where there's plants growing there, tropical plants, things that we can't grow outside necessarily, but bananas, guava, mango, all these things that just, again, and how do you worship in a space that has nature in it? That's something we have to figure out.
Yeah.
But I think that God made it. Romans says such a strong witness that people can't look at nature and say there's not a God. They have to look at nature and say, man, there's something else going on out there. It leaves men without excuse, the Bible says. Why would we not take a witness that strong and put it inside the space we worship in? If it's going to scream about Jesus and scream about God, then put it in the worship space.
Right.
And that's my feeling about it, at least. And I'm not saying there's not things we got to figure out and how we do all that.
Right.
But I think if it's going to witness to the Lord, just as much as our preacher screaming it from the pulpit, my preacher doesn't scream very much, but you know what I'm saying. Speaking boldly,
metaphorically,
then why wouldn't we?
Yeah.
And so,
amen.
Those are some of the things. So for me, it would be a dome. North side is bermed, south side is an atrium, and then I think personally at my church, we would, if I was the dictator of the world, which I'm not, we would worship in the round.
Oh yeah.
We would consider the acoustics. We would consider like what would uplift the human spirit, remind us of our true humanity and our true nature.
Yeah.
And whatever checks the box for that,
right,
we figure a way to put it there.
Yep.
What do you think?
I'm in.
So if you saw a church building like that,
I'd
you
be
found
so
out,
intrigued.
Yeah, you saw a church building like that, you realize that it harvests its own water and electricity and takes care of its own waste and actually makes, grows its own food even for its adherents and all these things. What would you think about that place? What would you think about those people? And would you at the very least have a few questions?
Yeah.
Be like, wait, what are you doing here?
Yeah. I would think of Eden. I think some people are living in harmony with God and creation there. And then I would have a lot of questions.
Yeah, me too. And hopefully the further they dug down, the more goodness they would find, instead of being like, oh, this is all just paint on the wall and some fancy furniture.
Yep.
So that's my opinion.
Well, cool.
I've got a lot more to say about it.
It'll come out.
I don't want to bore people.
It'll come out eventually.
Yeah. So, and the outside of the building would just be just as important, I think.
Yeah.
The parking lot, all that jazz, how water interacts with the land and all that stuff. I think we should be a people that, don't just think about the inside of the building, but how we're affecting everything else.
Yep. Well, thank you for sharing your heart and not just, I know you've been thinking about this for a really long time. So this is not just, it should be different. You're to the, how this is how it can be different.
Right. And my big dream is to actually build church buildings that use these concepts, but also build smaller versions of them are homes where everything faces south for the windows. The north side is bermed, on and on it goes.
Yeah. The same thing
program, but for sleeping and eating and doing the things that we do at home.
Yep.
But I want to see my entire neighborhood change in the way it looks. And when people come through, they literally see it as a Jubilee land, that it's a different place and you're entering in Jubilee land. I think, just to bring it back to our name, Jubilee, Freedom, and Shalom, I think the design of that building should declare Jubilee over people that, like right now, I don't know exactly, but do you know how much your electric cost on your church building is every month?
Oh, I have no idea. I mean, it's a lot though.
I think for our building, when we're going full force, not in the pandemic, I think for us, it's over 10 grand a month.
Yeah.
Sometimes 15 grand a month. So what would it be to declare Jubilee over this building and say, we don't have that burden of having to pay these bills. And if we don't pay the bills, then all this stuff, bad things will happen, and living in the stress of this burden, this responsibility that's on our shoulders because we didn't build our building with those things in mind.
Right.
If we were to do that, we would be declaring Jubilee over this place.
Yep.
That Jubilee would bring freedom, and that freedom would bring Shalom. And that's
Amen.
what can we do in our community when we're living out of a place where we've been declared, Jubilee has been declared over us, over our buildings, over our lives. That moves us into a phase of freedom, but we don't want to use our freedom for ourselves, but we want to use it to love other people and use those resources for others.
Yep.
We've been formed, our hearts have been formed by God. And that goes bringing more shalom and declaring Jubilee over more people. That's the kind of building that I want us to live into.
Yep.
What I don't want to do is like, well, we don't got to give to the church anymore because it does it all on its own. It's
right.
like
it's freeing you up to do more things.
That's right. So the world has enough worry every day for itself.
Totally.
We don't have to make up our own drama or make up our own problems. We can declare Jubilee over things and places and move on to other people's problems and try to bring more and more people into that place of shalom.
Yep.
So
thank you guys for listening to this episode of the podcast. Thanks for tuning in, for nerding out with us a little bit. And we hope that you guys have a great rest of your day. Amen.
Thank you guys for listening and for letting me geek out for a second. If you have more questions, post it, ask it. I can't wait to talk to you more about it.
Yep. Peace out, guys.
Later.